I work on in advertising, and every now and then I get to shoot commercials, and I do different things in it, like editing or shooting or directing. And I got a job directing this corporate video, which is basically like a boring little story about a corporation. And I was hired to do one for a pharmaceutical company, and they were shooting in LA. And they were shooting in LA because they like the idea that they're making a movie, but they're not really making a movie. And that's why they hired me. And I was flown to LA, and I had to conduct an interview with the CEO of the company. So it was pretty delicate because he was a big, like, super rich guy, and he was staying in a 5-star hotel, and we had to make sure everything was running smoothly and that the questions were the right questions. And so we fly to LA, and I get there, and I get to check into the hotel, and the lady's like, "Oh yeah, we heard about you. The thing is, Robert De Niro is in town, and they're going to shoot a scene here in the hotel. And we're going to do the best that we can do to accommodate both productions. Corporate video versus Robert De Niro." And I was like, "Oh man, this is going to suck." So I go into my room, and I'm like kind of like getting really nervous, and I'm like freaking out, and I'm like, I'm just going to smoke a fucking cigarette. I have to smoke a cigarette. And I'm smoking a cigarette, and immediately they knock on the door, and I'm like opening the window. I feel like I'm 15 or something, and I open the door, and there's like a very serious, like, concierge-looking guy sitting there with like a little, like, white towel on his elbow, and he's like takes long pauses, and he's like around 70 years old, and he's Hispanic. And he says in Spanish, he says, "May I come in?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he walks in, and there's like, for some reason, there's like 2 double beds in the room. I don't really quite understand what that's all about, but anyway, that's how it is. And he says, "Do you mind if I sit down?" And I'm like, "No, no problem." He sits down, and he takes off his shoes. And I'm like, "Yeah, it's interesting." And he looks at me, and he says, "Where are you from?" And I say, "I'm from Colombia." And he says, "I'm from Colombia too." And he says, "You know what? I've been working in this hotel for 35 years. And I was like, "Oh, that's great, you know, good for you." And he says, "Not very often do we have one of ours on the other side of the line of service. We're very proud to have you here." And I was like, wow, it was like pretty moving. I was like, "Thank you, man, you know, like whatever I can do for you." And he says like, "No, whatever I can do for you, just let me know." And I was like, and it immediately hit me, like, I'm thinking, this guy thinks I'm the guy shooting the Robert De Niro movie. And I was like, "Look, you know, thank you so much, you know, this really means a lot to me. I just need you to know, I'm not the guy, I'm not with Robert De Niro. I'm doing the corporate video on the 4th floor." And he was like, "No, I know who you are. We know who you are." And I was like, and he's like, "I'm going to give you my personal cell phone. I don't usually answer my phone. If you need anything, just call me." And I'm like, "Okay." Sure thing, next day we're shooting, and it's a total, my crew is trying to get a job in the movie, and nothing is working. I have to interview this like super multi-millionaire pharmaceutical company, like CEO, and we get like this little room that has no view, no curtains, no chairs. There's no electricity, and I'm just like, "Oh, what am I gonna do?" And there's nowhere to park out. Like, you know, the movie people have like 25 trucks and like 600 people crew, and there's no place for my little guy with his van to park his things. And I'm like, I'm just gonna call this guy, you know, his name is Jorge, Don Jorge. So I call him up, and he organizes the whole thing for me. And all of a sudden, he's like, "Just get me a radio." I get him a radio, and we're on the radio all the time. And he's like, he was like, "We're gonna get into Robert De Niro's room." So we get into the room where they're shooting their scene, and I walk in, and he's like, all the service is Colombian. Everybody moves out of the way. We walk in, we shoot our thing. Robert De Niro is like freaking out over there, and I'm like, you know, I'm like, "Dude, you know, 5 more minutes, we gotta do this thing." You know, like, we need to move the trucks, and Don Jorge's like, "Move the trucks." Get out of here, they're moving everything. He's like, "We need to take the curtains off, move the chairs, do this," and the prop people from the Robert De Niro movie are like freaking out, and I'm like, we are like moving everything around, and it was just fantastic that he like gave me such a hand to get this thing done. And on my way out, the producer of the movie that De Niro was doing was like a big Hollywood wig. And we're coming down of the shoot, and we're walking outside of the hotel, and the guy is coming in, and he throws his keys at me, because he assumes that I'm the valet parking guy. And Don Jorge says, like he like gets all blushes up, and he's red, and he says, "You've been mistaken for one of us." And I was just like, all of a sudden it hit me that like I was one of them, and I said, I'm one of you. And it was kind of like, I was famous with the right people to be famous, and not famous with the wrong people to be famous, so it was okay with me.